Thank you. Here we are again for the promised extended interview with Riyas. We're at the Nirox Sculpture Fair, where Riyas's new installation, Fourth World, which is two statues of Ambedkar pointing east and west amidst four plinths of different heights, has just been installed today and has been inaugurated as part of the Sculpture Fair. So here in this section, I just want to interview Riyas about a whole set of other questions, more broadly related to his practice, his life, and his life as an artist in India right now. And India, an idea of India which is under considerable siege right now. And it's a movement into which Riyas speaks very convincingly, forcefully, and passionately. So I'll begin by asking Riyas about the painting of Ambedkar just behind him, which he did on a previous visit to Johannesburg at the invitation of the Center for Indian Studies in Africa. This was last year in 2018, and he's back in 2019 to complete the installation of the two statues. So Riyas, can you tell us something about this painting that you did at the Cradle of Humankind, where we are located right now?
I think the invitation which I received, I think I see it as a great blessing, because it was almost around the same time I was working on my solo show called Holy Shiva in Delhi. And that was a project which looked at what is India today. So it's mainly looking at discourse on Gandhi and the possible discourses which one could trigger around the ideas of Ambedkar, and also Indian Constitution and what is happening in the context of violence against the minorities and the displaced. So I also addressed a little bit of a historic narrative of violences which happened in India, and also lynching recently. So I think coming here, from the thick of many other things which I was doing, was almost like a blessing, because this is a place, it's a cradle of humankind. It's one of the biggest sculpture parks in the world, and total silence. And I was actually, back into a place that where there was nobody, except some evenings. I was the only person living here in this big park. So, and for me, it was after many years. It was a time for contemplation, and so post that Holy Shiva exhibition, the kind of discourses which happened, and some of the comments. I was actually taking it as a site to kind of sit and think, and I immediately felt that this has got a power. There's a site of thinking kind of thing. So I think my main thinking, which revolved around what some of key points which Ambedkar kept arguing about the human struggle and the ongoing struggle, and he comparing it with the kind of it's an historic or not historic, and it's a generational issue. It's been happening to many generations. The similar issue which he is fighting for. So I thought, it was a very interesting site to kind of think and study him and understand. So I kept reading, about some of his ideas, and so it was almost like it was not a painting. It was almost like kind of writing a diary here. So I just went to I just decided to paint this very angry looking, young, very argumentative Ambedkar, which he is very famous for, even still today. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, I wanted to ask you a set of questions which actually takes us before this exhibition, and to introduce the viewer to something of who you are and your practice. So I'd like you to talk a bit about your growing up in Kerala. And very often for a lot of people, the idea is that Kerala is a largely cosmopolitan society where issues of caste have been fought against and resolved to a large extent. It's a state where there's 60% Hindus, 20% Muslims, 20% Christians. We also have a significant Jewish minority. How much of all of this goes into your thinking, your practice, your building, as it were, and what makes you the artist that you are?
Yeah, I think it's an important, point. I mean, when you consider, individuals. I mean, what is their background and where they come from. So in my case, I think I owe a lot to my family. I mean, my state, my surroundings, and my neighbors, because I actually had a very, very interesting political or social upbringing, and which was very inclusive in every sense. And my family was, my father especially lived a very strong socialist lenient life. I mean, he was his brothers were very much involved in communist movements, and he was also in the initial years. But he was somebody he was an entrepreneur. I mean, he had a matchbox factory, and he had more than 100 people working in his factory. So he was very much committed to the employees, and also the family. I have 10 siblings, so I come on the 9th son. So he was he was somebody who I started seeing as a very responsible person. So at the same time, he was the first person who kind of put a seed in me that whatever you do, do it for the benefit of the people and community. I mean, if you divert from there, don't move into anything. I mean, whether it's a business or whether it's art or like literature or cinema or music. So he felt that. I mean, I have a lineage towards art. I mean, from the early years, because I was drawn into that. But his message was always, his message was always interesting. That people first. I mean, so that, and he proved it. I mean, he was doing that in front of us, as an entrepreneur. So. And that's something, the energy which I still carry with me. So when I went to study, art in JJ School of Art, I mean, he said that, maybe it's, you're going to understand. But because I went to study textile design to Bombay, I was not going to kind of study art because my brother, name is Ibrahim, who actually found there is certain kind of an inclination in me towards art and design. So he told me to kind of, because of my taste and choice, he said textile design is very good for you, go for it. That's how I live, like many Malayalis who opt to live to Middle East. I have my 6 brothers who lived in Middle East, in Dubai and Saudi Arabia and Sharjah and other places. So there's always that, the Malayali leaving the place to find job and to seeking for a better life. But I always told my father, I'd never go to Gulf. But I was much more interested in putting my learning, and because I looked at Kerala through his eyes, because he is somebody who was a very strong follower of socialist ideas. He was very Gandhian in his approaches. At the same time, he was also a follower of his religion. He did 5 times namaz, and so he was a kind of very, symbolic of how to live in a social space like this. So, and he had everything in right space. So I didn't have to kind of look at, art icons to kind of relate my art with people. So that was very, so I would say that my upbringing in Kerala my upbringing in Kerala has contributed in many levels from the history of social action or political action which you've seen around, from my own family, how my father dealt, his business and this larger family which he was hugely responsible. Then how very easily he let his children go out. Mm-hmm. And because 10 children, I don't think he saw anybody and all of them together after a point of life. because everybody was out, somewhere or the other. So I think, I think Kerala is kind of, Kerala's, living in Kerala is very infectious also. You get affected by everything because you're always, engaged with, the social space, politics, global politics. Because I still remember telling my friends in Bombay whenever they kept asking about Kerala, because they were, the moment they come, I tell you that I am from Kerala. The few things which they ask is that very classic things, high literacy, politically conscious, beautiful state, God's own country, all those things comes in. But because they started seeing certain kind of politics in me in my initial years, so I used to tell them, 5th standard when I went to high school, which was 5 kilometers away from my house, or I think the 10th or the 12th day of the first 5th standard schooling, I went back home by 11 o'clock. So my mom asked, what is it? So the reason was that, there was a strike, which in solidarity with Palestinians. So that's the upbringing you have. So it just comes to you, this kind of political consciousness and about the global, context which you are supposed to live with. So I think living in Kerala, living as a Malayali, is that you learn automatically, or it's not. I don't think it's a university. I always feel that it's a good teacher.
Right.
It's a, you need to have a good teacher to teach us about kind of greater understandings. The similar experience, I actually went into kind of a similar experience in Bombay.
Yeah, that's what I want to ask you a bit about, because one of the things about, as you point out, growing up in Kerala, there's a certain broadness of vision that one gets used to, certain histories of struggle against inequality, against forms of irrationalism, forms of superstition. There's also a sense of growing up as not so much as a Hindu and a Muslim, like as you say with your father, somebody who prayed 5 times a day but was a communist and was committed to a larger vision of what society should be. But when you move to a city like Bombay, which has other histories of relation between Hindus and Muslims, and I know you were there in the period 1992 and 1993 when a huge fault line was opened up in Indian society as a result of Hindu nationalist discourse. What did it mean for you, and this is a slightly personal question, what did it mean for you as a Muslim? Because I suppose at some level you do see yourself as a Muslim as well, amidst your artistic practice and your much broader secular sensibility.
Yeah, I think, see what I, carried with me from Kerala, the idea of, living in any social space, which has helped me a lot to understand, the way things changed, especially in a city like Bombay, around religious, discriminative approaches, the attacks against the minorities. So I think that's where, your understanding and, your ability to kind of negotiate plays a big role. I became more conscious about my religion after going to Bombay, because I went to Bombay in early '92. Then late
very crucial point, yes.
In late '92, things starts changing. So I was also staying in a place where I was very close to one of the most important political leaders, like Balasaheb Thackeray. My hostel was next to him. So it was always, there is some kind of a camera there, to kind of take a note of what is next. So on the right hand side that I have, a legend growing, Sachin Tendulkar, the next building. So I was actually sandwiched between these two, interesting, icons of, especially in Bombay at that time. So I actually, I was the only Muslim in the hostel. There were many students from different parts of India and also from outside India, and mainly from Maharashtra, the rural Maharashtra. So I think it was not difficult for me to kind of, to live very silently without even thinking about my religious identity. Maybe my father has helped me a lot in understanding that complexity of India, what it is. Then only when later you start your practice, you started looking at different political icons, you study. So, like I said, that if Kerala can be a very good teacher, I think Bombay was my postgraduate teacher. I mean, it's like a little bit more, that where Bombay was giving me higher studies in that sense. I mean, so its effect on you, the cosmopolitan nature of the city, the way it affects you, the travel in trains, and the fear. See, Bombay was the first city which gave me the symptoms of social fear, where you are not supposed to talk about the person who's ruling you. That's my first 92 onwards. I started experiencing that aspect. So when I see the fear in Indian society today,
Yes.
which is a very cultivated, very programmed thing, I think back, that because in a train you can't talk politics, in a public space you can't talk politics, in a tea shop you can't talk politics, and that was my Bombay, like my initial years of Bombay. So, and the college was apolitical. The JJ School of Art had nothing to do with politics. Even I saw JJ School of Art as an institution historically known for abstract. But I started seeing shift in the language of art making post 92, 93, 94. It started slowly changing. Some of the major Indian political artists triggered a different kind of discourse through very interesting exhibitions which was traveled into Bombay. I think my early Bombay years are like something which I still sit back and think, because
I suppose it tended to bring together your life, your politics and art in a way that probably you didn't want it to. It was, there's a way in which history impinges on you in India. Right? I mean, because certainly for a lot of us, there have been various watersheds. And that series that you did for Holy Shiva, your exhibition, which takes up 1947, 1984, 1992, 2002, 2016. And when these events happened in 1992, we were all woken up and we thought, well, here we are at an conjuncture in history which we hope won't happen again, forgetting that just 8 years before, with the assassination of Mrs. Gandhi, there had been a violence unleashed on a minority, and it happened again in 2002 in Gujarat. So there is a way in which one can't actually be in India and not have history sitting on your shoulder all the time. And I suppose a lot of your artistic practice in Bombay reflects that. But there's another question that I wanted to ask you about. When we are at a moment in some sense where we are troubled, a lot of people are beginning to despair. And when one thinks back to somebody like Ambedkar, right? Ambedkar was very convinced of both the need for and the possible impossibility, if one could use a phrase like that, the possible impossibility of Maitri, of friendship. Right? So what does art do in a circumstance like this? And this is where I want you to think forward to the idea of the Biennale, which you helped start along with Bose Krishnamachari in 2012. A very difficult struggle, but that we'll get to later. But how does art and artistic practice at a particular conjuncture in history allow us to address this politics of a possible friendship, a possible amity between people, of Maitri, bringing Maitri back?
Yeah, I think my stay in the hostel, JJ School of Art hostel in Kalanagar, which is around 30 minutes away from the college, was an interesting site where, you know, different plus artistic traditions came to study in JG School of Art, and the hostel was their resort, and it was fully subsidized, and it was like almost like living in a free space with very subsidized food, and it was a great learning space for me. It was my first living in hostels after living in my home in Kerala. I had almost all my room partners come from a very Dalit Maharashtrian background, and very interesting stories I encountered on a regular basis with them. Their stories from their villages. So one of my, room partner who was almost for 3 years continuously was a young artist who was struggling to practice now. Is Rahul Vajale. So his father was a school teacher. So every time, evenings are like very interesting discussions. Like one day he was telling me that after coming back from village, about his father's experience. Father, being a school teacher, he was doing census, national census. So he was telling me that his father is doing the census in his village, and most of the houses his father is not allowed to enter. He used to stand outside the gate with the record book and ask, "Ye ghar pe kaun kaun hai?" And they'll say, So it was just almost like, though I've heard this still exists in places in Maharashtra, but these are the kind of first-hand experiences, and I'm hearing I'm talking about 94, 95, which we have heard about Kerala, maybe 7 years ago or 100 years ago. But so I don't think, I grew up with that kind of extremity in Kerala, because I remember walking back from my school to my home, there is an area where there are temples and other things. So if we ask for water, I have experienced, they will keep water on a particular, stone, and they take that. But we never thought that, it is because of caste or anything. But we've experienced it. But coming to Bombay, consistently hearing stories like this and reading, poetries of, Marathi writers, reading even Tukaram, for instance, and listening to this Dalit politics, which is much more sharper and contextual in a state like Maharashtra. I think it's I always used to feel that, unlike Kerala, that where Ambedkar was not, a part of a social discourse, when we were growing up, it was my first striking point was that Ambedkar, where I always see him around, if you just walk into a gully, you see, Ambedkar has been celebrated in statues, and his photograph has been he's been considered as a god. So I think that has played, but I never looked at, politically, because always when you touch upon those kind of subjects, people target you as, or consider you as a very cliched approach of art making and other things. So I just kept myself away. But there was this feeling in you that, this social discrimination, and which you're seeing or which you've heard, you're experiencing in Maharashtra on a regular basis. And so, but it happened with me very late, when in recent years, that when you started seeing an enmity growing into, the game which one is using to kind of to accumulate power. So that's when then you see that, there is there's enmity growing. There's no possibility of, talking about friendship.
Mm-hmm.
There's constant enmity growing in the social space. That's where, I think that this man has come back into the, into the discourse. But going back to another parallel journey which I was having in relationship with my work from 92 onwards, I started responding to socio-political issues. But when I did my first exhibition in Bombay, the exhibition was titled Unconditional. Because I always used to think that, I grew up in a place like Kerala where we always lived very argumentatively. That's your spirit of living. You question everything. You discuss everything. You debate, and that's your lifestyle. But you come to Bombay, you start seeing that people are living unconditionally. In fact, I titled my exhibition Unconditional, and most of the works revolved around that. Then, moving further in a similar idea, because I always wanted to kind of look at creating a discourse or an art which can connect to people, which can talk about people, which also talks about the idea of diversity, coexistence, multiculturalism, but thinking that my initial years of even diverting myself into art started with the big issue happened in '92.
Mm-hmm.
Because we always thought that now maybe you should always think about having friendship, having that sahudaryam which you always talk about.
Okay.
There should be another possible. So maybe that is my that should be my approach. I took it as a very strong political decision. So that's why my art was becoming political in those adopting those terminologies. But according to me, it was nothing political about it. It was the reason to move further. There's no other way of making art according to me. Then you do Faith Assembly, that in 2004.
Right.
Again, with a very assertive, I was actually implicating the religion as a culprit, because that's because I started seeing that shift happening, because of my contrast, I started seeing that that we have become so religious. Yeah, I wanted to address that, and 2004 I did that project. Then I felt, when I exhibited it in Delhi, I felt that people are misunderstanding my context, because why I am talking about all this religion in a point where I am critiquing the religion as a culprit for all these chaoses which is being created, which historically is a true factor, but maybe they were not agreeing to that debate at that point of time because people wanted a departure from it. But I felt that I have to prove a point. Then I made a work, very consciously I made a work called My Father's Balcony,
Mm-hmm.
which was part of the second show in Bombay. When I travelled my show from Delhi to Bombay, I added that work into Faith Assembly project, because that's the tension I felt. So you were always very consciously practicing dealing with these very sensitive subjects. So I wanted to bring that work, My Father's Balcony, into discourse to say that I'm doing these kind of projects because I have a background like that.
Right.
That's our background. That's our history.
Right.
So that's
Then actually, this brings us to the question of history, because I think the idea of the Father's Balcony actually brings together two moments. I mean, there is a whole history, a weight of tradition, a set of practices that you inherit, which are about sociability, which are about friendship, which are about diversity, which are about conversation. But what you look out on from the balcony is a whole set of other things, of a changing set of circumstances, the conjuncture of religion, fault lines emerging in society. So you stand somewhere in the middle, carrying this history with you, but looking at a history in the making which you are very uncomfortable with. And that's why I was thinking about some of the philosophy behind the setting up of the Kochi Biennale, for example, because what struck me when I came in 2012 for the first Biennale is that it was bringing together many submerged histories, both within the country, notions of equality, notions of friendship, which had been submerged in the emerging politics of the nation, but at the same time was also drawing upon larger international histories arising from decolonization, you were thinking about a geography that included Iran as much as Vietnam, as much as the former Yugoslavia. So it was a different geography that was being put, which was also a different set of histories that was being put before people. The crucial thing about the Biennale, of course, was its location, right, in Aspinwall House, a site which had been trading for a considerable amount of period. As you entered the space, you could get the smell of pepper, jute, all the commodities that had passed through. You were very careful to have an artist select and curate the procedures rather than having a curator. A lot of the artwork was created in situ. So there were many departures that the Cochin Biennale inaugurated, apart from the different history that it summoned up. So if you could just tell us briefly, why did you decide to do it? Because it was an act of temerity, or as in Malayalam we would say changutam. Right? To think about generating a biennale. You had been away from Kerala and Bombay for a while. Kerala is an extremely contentious space within which to do things. So why the Biennale? Why in 2012? What were the ideas that went into it? Something of those issues.
I think, as I said, I mean, from 92 onwards, I mean, if you really see that, I mean, the kind of focus I've been, having in continuing a kind of discourse, or for a space which accommodates all kinds of possible conversations, was always there. And I used to have many conversations with my friends about the history of Kerala, how less, or how how much managed it is, or how much packaged it is in a contemporary context to easily establish a certain kind of a possible future. I mean, I always used to have this kind of discourses, and I still remember in '99, the second year of my master's degree, I did a large installation inside JJ School of Art called "He Used to Believe That EMS Planted Coconut Tree in Kerala." So that was my,
EMS being EMS Namboodiripad, Marxist theoretician, first Chief Minister of Kerala, yes.
Yeah. So I used to always feel that, I mean, there's a kind of misconception that, everything today, what you see is because of a certain kind of an ideology. Okay, I believe and I admire that, we had a first, 1957, we had the first democratically elected communist government in the world. I mean, it's a remarkable achievement, and the way we kept that history alive with great amount of social action and public participation, distribution systems, education, transformation, but at the same time I used to feel that we have forgotten many of our histories and contributions. I mean, that was always there. So I started actually working on a project which deals with the kind of a larger maritime history, and I did a project. I mean, I did one work which got exhibited called St. Thomas at Fort Cochin in Amsterdam in 2010. That was one of my first work, which is going out of that similar thinking. Then I was studying, the cultural mix of the place, and I started, creating a lot of sculptures around that. It was the same time in 2010, this particular possibility of conversation happens with the culture minister of Kerala. So again, the communist lineage, their interest in art and culture comes in, their interest in progressive thinking comes in from a Kerala perspective. So it was a right junction that, you're also sitting on an idea to kind of propagate that secularism, idea of diversity, multiculturalism, coexistence, and Kochi is a site, which you have identified to kind of tell the story of. So that's when this, this minister asked, maybe he was the culture minister and also the education minister of Kerala in 2010. So one can, what is possible to do in Kerala to kind of, to bring this distance, to lessen the distance, between this contemporary art and people, and how we can, transform, social space by also accommodating art, because Kerala is famous for its literature, its contributions in other areas of knowledge and cinema, theatre, everything as we do. But visual art was always he's somebody who migrates. Most of the visual artists, starting from Raja Raghuvarma, had to kind of leave the state to survive. So there's a strong history of contemporary art also. Most of the important Malayali artists doesn't live in Kerala. They're so popular, but even Malayalis doesn't know. But it was not the case in the literature or in cinema, film. Normally people lived in Kerala and practiced. But this was the junction. But sharing that idea to kind of do a biennale, to celebrate the diversity of the larger nation in a place like Kochi, where there are 40 different communities living together in a 4-kilometer square.
Right.
That was actually a kind of a very interesting trigger, because that's what echoed, that's what resonated, because what, the power which you always felt about people was, it's tremendous in the context of Kerala, because if you have proper conversation, there are people ready to listen to. So the issue which you pointed out, how difficult to enter into a place like Kerala with a new idea, was equally challenged by having conversations, by telling the community there that this is a project which is going to celebrate your legacy. It is not a project which is going to kind of come and destroy that, the indigenous, qualities which this particular region has. It is already a cosmopolitan place. It has been in conversation with the larger world. It's got blood relations with the larger world. It's been a site where many kind of conversations reached,
right.
Philosophies reached, religions reached. Many settlements happened through trade and history. So I think within 1 year, that conversation, the debate was won, even before the biennial was done. So it was an ongoing, 2011 was crucial in having this debate, because it was a risk. It was not only a financial risk, the artists are taking, or the state felt that initially that, I think there's an important point one has to say in the context is that it was a coming together of a political will and an artistic vision and a bureaucratic wisdom or an administrative wisdom, where it was discussed well. Okay, this can happen, and because these artists have taken or shown a courage to take risk, and the initial year, it was so difficult. After the first edition of the biennial, the organization went into kind of a complete financial, crisis. It was in a huge debt, and we had to fight a case to kind of, to win and get the money back and stabilize it within another 2 years, and by the second edition came. So for me, that if any project, if it can root in the history of the place where it is happening, will grow. I think Kochi is a great example where because it was celebrating their own history, their own legacy, their own, and the responsibility of the Biennale is even today and even from the beginning is to give back to them, economically, give them a little bit more of pride to celebrate, survive through that cultural economy which comes in, slowly comes in, and also flourish, because Kochi is not a port city anymore. Right. The trade has gone into different modes. It is just a transit port which is operated not even by the people of Kerala. It's a completely different economic structure. So people have no hope because the ship is not reaching the shore. So then what is the benefit you have. So Kochi's economy is not going to survive around these kind of trade possibilities. It will only survive through cultural economy, maybe a little bit of a tourism into it. So I think Kochi's history is a history which the larger world can celebrate. So from there, so it was a very interesting investment. I think it was maybe the best cultural acupuncture which happened in post-independent India to reunite, this the fractures.
Yeah, actually that's true. I mean, there's something about the politics of location, or to borrow a phrase from where you are right now, the power of sight, that Kochi summons up particular histories. Kochi is located in particular histories, which is possibly what makes the Kochi Biennale also one of the most democratic biennales. I mean, you pay a pittance of 100 rupees, which is like the equivalent of 20 South African rands, which means that everyone can go. And in the 4 years that I've been going, there have been auto rickshaw drivers, there have been the Central Reserve Police Force constables who have been recruited, there are people from madrasas, there are school children, and they respond to a lot of these artworks with equal mixtures of bewilderment, understanding, and knowledge. Yeah? So I think there's something that you've managed to do, or that whole team around the Kochi Biennale have managed to do, which is possible perhaps only in Kochi, but I'd like to think it's a replicable model elsewhere, that through the Biennale, through such events, one is actually possible, it is possible for us to create a politics of friendship, to bring back, to recover those histories where people live together amicably in conversation, in argumentation, as you put it. But finally, before we end the interview, I'd like to talk to you about your current project, Uru Harbour, which is your own art practice center at Fort Kochi, which actually, and it's curious that you've chosen the word harbour, because as you spoke right now, there is also there is a way in which maritime trade is a memory right now in Kerala. The sea is constantly present, but the sea as central to the economic life of Kerala is becoming less so, except through migration. That it's because of the ocean that Malayali see the Gulf as another district of Kerala, for example. So what does Uru mean to you? What do you hope to do with Uru? And if you could just speak a bit about why you chose that name, which is a very poignant and evocative name.
Yeah, I think that's, Uru's, the idea of Uru actually started in 2014 with me after doing 2 editions of the Biennale. So I was at a, junction that now I should move on and think about a little bit more about initial thoughts I had in 2010 when the idea of Kochi was considered as a site of celebrating the diversity. So, but some of my other readings which followed, even some of your observations about how the Malayali forgot the sea, and he went behind the land, which was a colonial construct, very different number, and you made a very interesting observation around that. So this has been there, and then some of the readings and understandings. I think I still remember in the first edition of the Biennale, the essay which we wrote, the project when me and Bose was, the first edition which was curated by me and Bose, we did an essay and it was titled Salt Heals. So and it actually had that assertion on why we are here. It is also because of the sea. So there was that assertion, and in fact the cover of the book, if you notice that, it was the expanse of the sea and the kind of exchanges, the kind of migrations which happen. So I am still in that mind frame. I want to live that. That's one reason that I thought, okay, the Biennale every year will change its topic. It will break another story with a new curator. It will revolve around new subjectivities of the time, and it is a site to descend, and we use that as also a kind of an expanse to kind of travel around. So the sea became a metaphor, so that's one reason that I thought you should, to carry this forward, you should have a very interesting, center which can trigger these discourses. So Uru was, symbolically named. As anybody associates with the sea and trade historically, I think Kerala has a very interesting name to this DAO. So decided that, and slowly started looking at maritime history as a point to kind of discuss. So I think it's an ongoing project, and I actually want to kind of focus very much on Uru and its initiative, because I will never move away from this idea of the Kerala's maritime history, and which I also feel that I'm part of that kind of an historic narrative, that where I feel that concerned about my own originality today, because it's an ongoing process. This is also getting questioned. What is your origin? As an individual, so whether are you also a migrant who reached here through different kind of trade travels which occur. So I'm interested in that now. So I want Uru to be a site of descent and discourse, and also to understand the history of human movement and how history has evolved. How much our region has experienced, or and why Kerala is like that. I always ask that question. What is the special thing about this, this Malayali? What is this? Why he is like that? And geographically it is like that. The Western Ghats, the rivers flowing in to the sea. We are almost like a banana leaf, and it's an amazing, historic landscape. Where we keep, triggering that, geographically that discourse is very, symbolic in that sense. As an artist, I want that freedom to explore, travel, understand, do projects. So what we did in, the last, 4 months recently was a great learning, because we used K.R. Sunil's that
excellent series of photographs.
Manjuka, that seafarers of Malabar. It's a grant which Uru gave to K.R. Sunil, and it's a travel research project. Then Biju's, that Kochi's, that 40 different community research project, which is an ongoing project.
Yeah.
Then also we showed, Joji's, that indigenous, that Lakshmi Punyama's portrait. But there was a great takeaway. For Uru, for all the people who are associated with Uru, I think, which is going to be also kind of a slogan for us to kind of move on. I'm also even thinking about curating a project around that, which is one of the seafarers from Ponani, while he was talking to K.R. Sunil in an interview, he said, Kadal, Tilakkinna Champana. So sea is a boiling vessel. I don't think there's any other word.
Right.
To take away as a learning for what you did for last 10 years in Cochin,
Right.
and and take that as a kind of a the largest correspondence. To take an institution which is also an offshoot of what I learned, called Uru. And I'm very serious about doing an exhibition titled that, Sea is a boiling vessel.
I think that's a brilliant image on which to end. Kadaluru Tilakkinna Chembana, the idea of the sea as being the crucible of history, the sea being the crucible of human endeavor. And as a historian, I'm deeply interested in your project of keeping history alive, or keeping histories alive, at a time when there is a mainstreaming of one narrative of Indian history. So thank you, Riyas, for the conversation. Thank you for coming to South Africa and doing this superb installation, which I hope will spark off conversations across the ocean about equality, about friendship, and about history, about Gandhi, about Ambedkar, about Mandela, and the joint histories of apartheid and caste, both as yet unresolved histories.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay,